Welcome back to our series on qualitative research methods. I'm Leslie Curry from the Yale School of Public Health, and this module is on a major qualitative study design, focus groups. Just a brief overview of the modules. The goal is to enhance our capacity to conceptualize, design, and conduct qualitative research in the health sciences. There are a total of 6 modules in this series, and this module examines the major qualitative study design focus groups. So what is a focus group? In this picture you see a group of individuals sitting in a circle in a room and some conversation happening. A focus group is a group of people with certain characteristics who generate narrative data in a focused discussion. The interaction and the group dynamics are really essential. The interaction among individuals can do several things. It can widen the range of responses. We're hearing from a range of individuals with a common experience, but of course different individual perspectives and views. The group dynamics can activate forgotten details. Hearing someone recount a story of their experience might help another remember, this happened to me. And the group exchange can also release inhibitions, can make people feel comfortable in describing their experience with a particular phenomenon. Focus groups can be useful for a number of kinds of topics in the health sciences. The first, characterizing social and cultural norms around a given health area, health behavior, or type of healthcare delivery. Focus groups can be useful for sharing and comparing. I really like this phrase by David Morgan, who's the author of the Focus Group Kit, and who describes sharing and comparing as the dynamic in the group where each member will offer up their perspective, and in that context, in the discussion, comparing their experience with others in the room. This can generate insights that wouldn't be possible in a one-on-one exchange. Focus groups can reveal how people talk about an issue because people are sitting around a table and exchanging amongst themselves. The researcher or moderator can listen and learn the kinds of language people use, their intonation, their views about a given issue. Focus groups can also be useful for exploring potentially sensitive topics. We mentioned this in the individual interview module as well, and so it really is dependent on the particular topic and the respondent group that you'll be working with to determine whether or not individual one-on-one interview format would be most appropriate or whether a group format is most appropriate given your topic. So a few minutes on designing focus group studies. What do they look like? Well, there are some standards for the group size and number in focus groups. So the principle, one in terms of group size, is that you want to have 5 to 10 participants per group. Fewer than 5, typically the dynamics are flatter. There isn't as much momentum in the group, maybe not as much speak and freedom when you have small group exchange. And more than 10 participants, it is very difficult for the moderator to keep the discussion moving, flowing well, and for each participant to have enough time to express substantively their view on a given topic. So the range of 5 to 10 is a guideline. And a second guideline is the number of focus groups per strata. We typically recommend having 3 to 5 groups per strata. So just a minute on stratification. If you determine that a given topic may generate some tension or difficulty if it's addressed, say, with a group of mixed gender, you may decide that it's important to have focus groups with all women and a separate set of focus groups with all men. And if that occurs, you need to be sure that you conduct 3 groups, a minimum of 3 groups of women and a minimum of 3 groups of men. So group composition, attention to group composition is really very critical. There are a number of ways we can think about assembling focus groups, and they really depend to great length on the nature of the question that you're asking. So several considerations. We want to avoid power differentials in the room among individuals. So for instance, if you were conducting a study about culture change in nursing homes. The pioneering effort to individualize care in nursing homes, by which residents express their needs and certified nurse assistants and nurse aides are free to deviate from schedules in order to respond to a resident preference or need. You would want to be mindful of having a focus group with the certified nursing assistants or nurse aides together with, for instance, the charge nurse or the nursing home administrator. You could imagine that the dynamic in that room would could really inhibit free exchange. So be mindful of power differentials in the room. Thinking about homogeneity and heterogeneity in the group. How alike do you want the group to be, and how different do you want the group to be? We're looking for some diversity so that you have a range of opinions, and yet you don't want to also have homogeneity or similarity in the group so that there is enough common ground to share and compare. Strangers versus acquaintances is another consideration in the composition of groups. Are you interested in having people who've never had an exchange with one another? Or is it more appropriate in a given circumstance to have acquaintances, those who have some familiarity with each other? Experts and novices. Are we looking to talk to experts in a given area who have deep knowledge of a phenomenon, or are we looking for a more naive view? And then stratifying by these salient characteristics, as I mentioned. It may be gender in a given group where you want to pay attention to those potential dynamics and create separate strata for those groups. Data collection. I like this image because to me it sort of tells all we need to know about data collection in focus groups. The idea is to just drop a pebble into the pond and to stimulate a ripple effect of conversation. The discussion guide, there's some guidance, some established techniques for structuring discussion guides. In general, the number of questions, we're looking for no more than 8 to 12 questions. Fewer is better. It's helpful to kind of label questions as 5 or 10-minute questions. One that the researcher comes in and thinks, I don't want them to spend too much more than 5 minutes on this. It's a relevant topic that's introducing them, bringing them to the core issue. The 10-minute question is where I really want them to linger and have deeper discussion. The sequence of questions are also some guidelines there. The opening questions should be things that could be answered quickly, that are based on facts. You want the individual to use their voice, to not be threatened, to not have a tricky question, to establish them as the expert, right? So there's one answer and they know it. So opening questions are really very useful for setting the stage in the room. An introductory question is to begin to foster interaction among the group and have them begin to focus on the topic at hand. Transition questions link the introduction to the real key questions and begin to put the topic in context. So you're moving people from sort of the broad comfort establishing questions into the core topic at hand. And there should be no more than 2 to 5 key questions in the guide. So item writing, just some things to keep in mind. Conversational, clear, simple language. Sometimes as researchers, we sit in our teams and we construct these complex, compound sentences that are our questions for our discussion guide. And when you speak them out loud, only then you can hear maybe how silly they sound or potentially off-putting. So read them aloud, practice them, see whether they in fact feel conversational and clear. Open-ended questions are critical. Again, not leading in any way, having very broad parameters for the respondents to begin to generate and shape the direction of the discussion. The think back technique can be really very useful, asking people to think back to the last time when you were at the doctor's office. It brings them out of the room, back to a time and place. It grounds them in an experience where they feel then they can draw upon details that are relevant to the discussion. So that can be useful. Avoid, if possible, asking why. This may seem counterintuitive. This is what we're trying to understand. Why don't you do X or Y? We don't want to ask this question so boldly and directly. It's very sharp in tone. It may cause defensiveness. It may make the respondent feel like there must be a right answer, and I better give that right answer. So in fact, we want to avoid the why question. Instead, we want to invite people to comment on how something happens or to describe their experience in detail. We also want to avoid giving examples. This may lead participants. Sometimes this technique can be useful if you give a very brief example to sort of get people going, but it also runs the risk of leading participants down a particular path. So be cautious on the examples. Be aware of the participants' time, their limits of all types, the time, limits to attention, limits to language, various cultural issues, and various communication skills. We, for instance, have done lots of focus groups with frail older adults in the community and bringing them to common spaces, libraries, and community centers to talk about services that they're receiving in their homes. And we need to be very mindful of their physical comfort, their ability to stay engaged in a conversation, the communication skills from the researcher to populations who may not be familiar necessarily or accustomed to being in research environments. So these sensitivities are really very, very critical in conducting focus groups. Moderator skills. Moderating focus groups requires a great deal of skill, and really the only way to attain these skills is to practice moderating. But there are some techniques that are really very critical to facilitating constructive and productive discussions. The first is having a strong interviewing technique. This means the ability to ask an open question and to receive the information, to listen acutely for opportunities to dig deeper. So having these keen observational skills, watching what's happening in the room. You can imagine in the moment, you have 8 people sitting around a table, you're beginning to just drop that pebble so there's a ripple effect and the conversation starts. You're very tuned to the dynamics in the group. This is one of the unique assets of a focus group model. And so keen observational skills, watch who's speaking first, who's listening, who's leaning forward, who's pulling back. It's really very, very critical. You need to have an ability to control and guide the discussion. This requires in-the-moment judgment. Again, if you think back to the interviewer module where we have the image of a path with a railing kind of going through a marsh, you want to be able to let the respondent, let the group conversation go, and yet you also need to control it and guide it without prematurely truncating conversation. This is very tricky and has to be assessed in the moment. You need an ability to suppress our own personal views. This is perhaps easier than it sounds. We're often, researching a topic that is of great interest to us. We probably have personal views, but we need to really be very neutral in the role of moderator. And lastly, again, respect for the participants. So active listening, leaning forward, paying attention, not scribbling notes or looking at the tape recorder or watching the time go by, watching the clock. Active listening, eye contact with each individual, concern for their comfort in the space. Respect for participants is really also very important to establishing a safe space for the data collection. So we're going to listen to an excerpt from a focus group and listen carefully really to the moderator. Some of the audio, you'll hear multiple members speaking at once, but listen for the moderator's voice and then we'll review what you've heard. So let's listen.
We're not going to go around the circle anymore. We just need to just join in whenever you have something to say. What to you all makes a good doctor? What does it take to be a good doctor, would you say?
One that listens.
One that listens, Mary says? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what you think, Eileen? Okay.
Definitely. Yes.
And what else about a doctor makes a good doctor?
Makes you feel comfortable when you're in the office.
Okay.
Takes an interest in you. Yeah.
And how would the doctor do that? Or how would he show that?
By just talking to you and being concerned about your problem. Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts about what makes a good doctor?
Maybe touching you,
This is Jenny.
not touching you all over, but like nice touch.
Yeah. Right.
And that's very good.
Tender loving
Person
care.
feels
Yeah.
good with that.
Uh-huh.
Nice personality.
Yeah.
Okay, that's Dorothy. What do you mean by that? Nice personality. What
Well,
kinds of things?
I think they got to show that they're interested in you.
Okay. Do you have any ideas of how they might show how they're interested?
Okay. So what did you hear there? Several things happening at once. You hear the moderator interjecting, saying, Mary, what do you think? Is that what you think, Emily? So identifying speakers. This is important for really the sort of mechanics of generating a data set for focus groups. The transcriptionist has to be able to identify a given voice with a name, some identification, so that you're able to understand which person is speaking at what time, and you're able to look at patterns of speech across members in the group. So being able to tag a specific name or identification to a voice is really critical for transcription. And in the moderating, we instruct people in the group, before you speak, please say your name. This isn't a very natural thing for us to do, and so participants often will just begin talking. And so the moderator can sort of quietly interject, Mary said this, and did you hear that? Is that what you said, Emily? You hear in this excerpt an icebreaker question, something very open, easy, what does it take to be a good doctor? And you can hear the respondents feeling confident in describing, I want one who, pays attention to me, one who, is close in the interactions, who knows your name. You hear the moderator asking clarifying probes. What do you mean by that nice personality? Asking for just a little more about what the respondent means when she's describing nice personality. And then lastly, you can hear the very dynamic exchanges in the group where individuals are starting. This is very early in the group, and you can hear them already starting to reflect back and forth across each other. So just to give you a sense of what the dynamic interplay might sound like in a focus group. Analysis of focus group data. This is an area where I think we often fall short. There are some assumptions. We may come to the data thinking, well, it's just a bunch of we'll analyze it like individual interviews, which it loses the richness of the group dynamic, and in fact doesn't pay attention to some of the critical aspects of focus group data, which is sort of the group interaction. And so analysis of focus group data requires careful attention to several things. We have to remember that the group is the unit of analysis, not the individuals within it. And so we're looking to extract the summary of emerging ideas and themes at the group level, not individual utterances within the text. So just mindful as we're approaching the data. We want to be looking for whether or not a theme is a view of one member or whether it was a theme for the group. Was it really only one participant who felt a given way or expressed a particular experience or perspective? Or was this one where there developed some consensus or some shared view throughout the group discussion? We want to know whether whether a response emerged as a result of a question led by the moderator, or whether it was something that spontaneously came from the group conversation. We want to note that more text does not mean the issue is more important necessarily. There may be some very brief text on something that was great agreement very quickly, and so we don't want to be sort of distracted into thinking that if there's a lot of conversation about something, it means it's really the essence of the study. And so looking at the dynamics in the group, really very critical throughout the group. Is there biasing? Is there groupthink? Is there a single member who dominates the discussion? So several tips for a good focus group. Creating rapport among the group members first. This is in contrast to individual interviews where it's really very much about the interviewer and the respondent and establishing that space for candor and disclosure right up front. In this instance, the moderator wants to be very, very light, almost invisible in the room, off to the side, and really focusing on the relationship among the members is the primary goal. And creating a relationship among them in the first moments of the group is the primary goal. Establishing a safe space, knowing how to make hesitant people feel comfortable in contributing in that space, really also can be very useful. Being prepared to redirect the group, listening very, very carefully and letting the group sort of take itself down a certain path, but not too far, and being ready to interject without squelching the dynamics. This is tricky. We want to bring the group around gently back to the topic at hand and not interject with too much control, because that can sort of deflate the momentum in a group. So be careful. managing the dynamics in the room. So there are always dynamics in every group that we experience. Focus groups is no different. And so there will be people who feel more confident, who are more vocal, who have stronger opinions. There will be others who are more hesitant and maybe feel more anxious in the group space. And so managing those dynamics really is something the moderator is responsible for from the moment the group begins through till the end, because the domineering dynamics can constrain conversation, and the sort of repeated interjection of a given perspective or view can also bias the dialogue. So managing those dynamics is really very important. And lastly, one of the benefits of focus groups is that we're getting to watch people as well. So being aware of the nonverbal information in the room, and there's lots of it. In our focus group work, we have a primary moderator who's responsible for sort of dropping that pebble and then facilitating the conversation as it goes. And we have a second person in the room who is doing managing all the logistics so that they're unobtrusive and taking careful note of nonverbal information in the room, who pulls away from the table, who seems to be aggressive, who is nodding in deference all the time to another respondent. And those kinds of nonverbal data are really very useful in interpretation, again, of the group findings, and with the group as the unit of analysis. So thank you for your attention.